In this video, we're going to take a look at the SAT practice test number 2, published by the College Board, and we're focused on Module 1 of the math portion of that practice test. So practice test 2, Module 1. If you want to find where this is at, you can go to the College Board's website. Under the paper practice tests, you'll find a bunch of different tests. You can go to this website or you can look it up via an internet search. Now, as a little bit of an add-on to this video, I did want to mention that that link I provided does not have practice test number 2 or 1 or 3 anymore. The College Board no longer has that up on their website, but you can find the practice test on other websites, and I will provide a link in the description of this video where you can find test 2. Once you download practice test number 2, obviously you'll see a reading and writing portion with 2 modules. And once you get down to page 30, that's where the math portion starts with module 1. You can see on page 30, they give you some formulas plus some statements about degrees in a circle, radians in a circle, measures of degrees of angles of a triangle. And then they give you a page of how they'd like you to write your answers. If your answer is a fraction, if your answer is a decimal, and so on and so forth. And then on page 32 is where module 1 starts. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do module 1 in this video, and we'll start now. Question 1 says, the line graph shows the percent of cars for sale at a used car lot on a given day by model year. For what model year is the percent of cars for sale the smallest? Well, it's smallest at the lowest point. And we can see at the lowest point, that is the year 2014. And so the answer to this is C, which is 2014. I'll just write 2014. So the answer to problem number 1 is 2014, which is C. Question number 2 says, for a particular machine that produces beads, 29 out of every 100 beads it produces has a defect. A bead produced by the machine will be selected at random. What is the probability of selecting a bead that has a defect? So basically, if the number of defects, we're looking at probability of defect, if you know that, we're going to utilize some probabilities based on the empirical numbers that are given here. So since 29 out of every 100 have a defect, the probability of having a defect is going to be 29 out of 100. And that is answer C. So C, 29 out of 100. Question number 3, let me move this, make this a little bit smaller. Question number 3 says, in the figure, line M is parallel to line N, and line T intersects both lines. What is the value of X? There's a number of different ways you can do this, but because M and N are parallel, there's this property that this angle X here is going to be the same as this angle. is going to be the same as this angle. The parallel lines mean those two are the same. The fact that the angle across is also x, that's a feature of intersecting lines. Now, notice that on this line here, 33 plus x forms this straight line. Also, 33 plus x forms this straight line. So whichever way you see that, 33 plus x forms a straight line, meaning that 33 degrees plus x degrees has to add to 180 degrees. If the arc length of a full circle is 360, then 360 degrees, then going from line to line in an arc is half of a circle rotation, which is 180. And if you take 180 and subtract 33, that's what you'd have to do for finding x. You'd get that x is equal to 147. So 147 is the answer to question 3, and that's answer D. Clear that up. Let's take a look at question 4. It says, what is the y-intercept of the graph that is shown? The y-intercept is where our graph hits the y-axis. It's pretty clear that the y-axis is the vertical axis. So notice that our graph is hitting the vertical axis at the point 0, 8. And therefore, the answer to question 4 is exactly that. The y-intercept, whoops, is at point 0, 8, which obviously is answer D, as in dog. So 0, 8 is the answer to question 4. Question 5 says the total cost, f of x, in dollars to lease a car for 36 months from a particular car dealership is given by f of x is equal to 36x plus 1,000, where x is the monthly payment in dollars. What is the total cost to lease a car when the monthly payment is 400? So in this case, total cost is the f of x. All we have to do is plug in 400 in for the x. We'd get 36 multiplied times 400 and then add 1,000. When you do that, 36 times 400 plus 1,000 becomes 15,400. So 15,400 is the total amount in dollars that the lease will cost. So the total cost of the lease is $15,400, which is answer C. Question 6 says each side of a square has length of 45. What is the perimeter of this square? Now, this is a square whose side lengths are 45. Perimeter is measuring around the outside. In other words, we have to add up all the sides. Since there are 4 sides of a square, oftentimes the perimeter formula is written as 4s. You can also visualize that or look that up in the formula section of the actual test. A square is one type of a rectangle, so you can actually just visualize that L plus W plus L plus W. Well, if all of these are the same, we'll call it S. S plus S plus S plus S gives me the perimeter. So if you wanted a picture, you could look that picture up. It doesn't have the formula for perimeter of a rectangle, but that's pretty straightforward. Add up all the sides. 2 L's plus 2 W's. If we're talking about a square, it's 4 times the side length. So in this case, that is 4 times 45, which is equal to 180. And so the perimeter of the square would be 180 units, whatever units we'd be dealing with. It doesn't give us a units, so 180 is our final answer. Question 7 says, what is the positive solution to the given equation? Now, you can solve this in various ways, but the way I'm going to do this is the algebraic approach. Basically, what we would do to solve this using algebra is we'd multiply both sides by x plus 6. If I multiply the left-hand side by x plus 6, then the denominator goes away. If I multiply the right-hand side by x plus 6, I get x times the quantity x plus 6, which is 55 is equal to x squared plus 6x. Now I can subtract 55 from both sides and get 0 is equal to x squared plus 6x minus 55. Now I did that so that the right-hand side can be factored and set equal to 0 on the left-hand side. So in this case, I'm going to be looking at factors of negative 55 that add to 6. And we'll go x plus 11 and x minus 5. 11 times negative 5 multiply to give me negative 55. And 11 plus negative 5 add to give me 6. So those are the two numbers I'm looking for. Since I've factored and set equal to 0, I can set each component there equal to 0. So either x plus 11 is equal to 0, or x minus 5 is equal to 0. So we get x could be equal to negative 11, or x could be equal to positive 5. Now, what is the question asking for? Question 7 asks for the positive solution to the given equation. So the positive solution is the 5, and x equals 5 would be your final answer. Again, because we're only looking for the positive solution here. Question 8 says an object travels at a constant speed of 12 centimeters per second. At this speed, what is the time in seconds it would take for the object to travel 108 centimeters? Now, you can do this in a number of different ways. One way to do it is to set up ratios. When we talk about a speed of 12 centimeters per 1 second, we can think of it as a ratio of 12 centimeters over 1 second. And then if we're asked to figure out how long it would take an object to travel 108 centimeters, we can set up a ratio where I don't know the number of seconds, so I'll call that x seconds. And at this stage, we can take 12x, I'm going to cross multiply, so 12 times x on one side and 1 times 108. on the other side. Dividing both sides by 12 shows me that this x would have to have been 9. And so 9 seconds is the answer, and that is A. There's a number of other ways you can do this as well. You can do this by multiplication of ratios. If I start with 108 centimeters, then I can multiply by some conversion where I have centimeters on bottom and seconds on top, and that'll give me seconds. Well, we know the speed is 12 centimeters for every 1 second. And so if I do that multiplication this way, I'm going to get out the centimeters, and centimeters cancel out, and I'll get out seconds. And then I take 108 times 1 over 12, which gives me 9 seconds. So you can do it that way as well. There's various ways, but they all, if the correct ways, all come up with 9 seconds. Question number 9, let me go down here. Question number 9 says, dataset X contains 5, 9, 9, 13. Dataset Y contains 5, 9, 9, 13, and 27. Which statement correctly compares the mean of dataset X and the mean of dataset Y? Now, you can do this by straight calculation, or you can do this by intuition. I'll do this by intuition. Notice that dataset Y is the same as dataset X, but we've added a 27. And 27 is bigger than all of the other numbers in dataset Y. It's bigger than all of the numbers in dataset X. So that means the mean of Y, and in mathematics, we can write mu as the mean. If you don't like that, you can write whatever you want. But in math, we use mu as the mean of a population. That mean of Y is going to be bigger than the mean of X. So the mean of Y bigger than the mean of X, or the mean of X is smaller than the mean of Y. And notice that's option B. So this is option B. The mean of dataset X is going to be less than the mean of dataset Y. Now, you could have also calculated the numbers as well. You could have taken 5 plus 9 plus 9 plus 13 and then divided by 4. The mean of dataset X is actually equal to 9 if you calculate it. And then you could have done the same thing for Y. 5 plus 9 plus 9 plus 13. And then add a 27. And then you'd have to divide by 5. You'd get a mean of 12.6. So if you actually did the calculation, you'd also see that the mean of dataset Y is bigger, or the mean of dataset X is smaller. But again, I would have used just intuition there. So B is the final answer. You can use intuition, or you can do calculations. Question 10 says a rocket contained 467 kilograms of propellant before launch. Exactly 21 seconds after launch, 362,105 kilograms of this propellant remained. On average, approximately how much propellant did the rocket burn each second after launch. Now, when we talk about the initial amount of fuel and the amount of fuel 21 seconds afterwards, that's really giving me 2 points. At the initial time of 0, we have 467,000 pounds. After 21 seconds, there is 362,105 pounds. If I want to figure out how much fuel is burning, that's basically the slope of the line between these 2 points. So I'm going to see the difference between these 2 fuel amounts. And since it was over a time span of 21 seconds, I'm going to divide by that 21. Now, if you do this in terms of the actual slope of a line, you'll get a negative number because the amount of fuel is going down. But that's perfectly fine. That's not going to do anything. You end up getting a negative 4,995. Subtract first, get that. That means that we're burning 4,995 kilograms per second. And the answer there is obviously A. So the answer to question 10 is A. Question 11 says, if 4x plus 2 is equal to 12, what is the value of 16x plus 8? Again, there's going to be a couple of different ways to solve this. I'll just use one method, the method that I think is the most quick, I guess. Realize that 4x plus 2 is off by 16x plus 8 by a factor of 4. In other words, if I multiply 4 times 4x plus 2 and then multiply 4 times 12, I get an equivalent equation, and it just so happens that when I take 4 times 4x plus 2, I get 16x plus 8. And that's obviously equal to 48. So by just multiplying this equation by 4 on both sides, you get an equivalent equation, and now we know that 16x plus 8 is equal to 48. So B would be the answer to question number 11. Now, another way of doing this problem is to solve all the way for x, subtract 2, and then divide by 4, and then plug in x into 16x plus 8. You'd also get a 48, but it'd be a little bit longer. So you can also solve for x if you'd like. Question number 12 says an object is kicked from a platform. The equation h equals negative 4.9 t squared plus 7t plus 9 represents this situation, where h is the height of the object above the ground in meters, t seconds after it's kicked. So h is the height, t is the number of seconds after this object is kicked. Which number represents the height in meters from which the object was kicked? So the height in meters, that's the h, from which the object was kicked. Well, when the object is kicked, then we're talking about a time of 0. Right at the initial spot, that's time of 0. So we take negative 4.9 times 0 squared plus 7 times 0 plus 9. And those zeros are kind of nice. They'll all go away. And you'll end up with just 9. So at time 0, the height is 9. That means when this ball is kicked, it's being kicked off a 9-meter platform. So the answer there is D. "13 says the given equation defines the function f. For what value of x does f of x reach its minimum?" Well, here's the thing about this question and any other question that looks like this one. This is a quadratic equation. Since this is a quadratic equation, then the minimum point or the maximum point is going to happen at the vertex. This is a quadratic equation. The 4 that's in front of the x squared is positive, so I know that the parabola is going to point up. And so the minimum happens at the vertex. And one of the the easy way to find the vertex is to take x equals negative b over 2a. Negative b over 2a is going to be the x value of a vertex, where the b is the coefficient of the x and the a is the coefficient of the x squared. That's going to give you the x value of the vertex. And when we do that here, the opposite of negative 50 is a positive 50. 2 times 4 is 8. So we end up with 50 over 8, which is 6.25, or if you want to write that as a improper fraction, 25 over 4. So that's the x value of the vertex, and that's what it's asking. It says, for what value of x does f of x reach its minimum? Well, it's going to be 25 over 4, or 6.25. Now, just a little bit of a side, I want to talk about how we write these things in. This goes back to the directions. It says if your answer is a fraction that's too long means over 5 characters, then write the decimal equivalent. Well, our fraction is not too long. 25 over 4 is not more than 5 characters. So we could have just written the fraction. Now, if we saw our answer as a decimal that is too long, over 5 characters, then we'd truncate it and round it to the 4th digit. Our decimal is not more than 5 characters, so we don't need to truncate. So in fact, if you want to write it as a fraction, that's fine. If you want to write it as a decimal, that's fine. Either way would be a correct answer, the 25 over 4 or the 6.25. Now, be careful on the mixed number stuff. It says if your answer is a mixed number, write it as an improper fraction or its decimal equivalent. So we could have written our answer as 6 1/4 as well. 6.25 is 6 1/4. But we would not write that as the answer. We would write either the improper fraction or the decimal equivalent as the answer. So either 6.25 or 25 over 4, both of those work, are legitimate ways of writing our answer, but 6 1/4 is not a good way to write the answer. All right, let's look at problem number 14. It says a small business owner budgets $2,200 to purchase candles. The owner must purchase a minimum of 200 candles to maintain the discounted pricing. If the owner pays $4.90 per candle to purchase small candles and $11.60 per candle to purchase large candles, what is the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget and maintain the discounted pricing? Now, this one is a little bit tricky. So to maintain the pricing, the owner must purchase 200 candles. I will write S as the amount of small candles and L as the amount of large candles. So S plus L needs to be at least 200. It could go over 200, but it's got to be at least 200. And then we are looking at the price. Well, $4.90 times the number of small candles plus $11.60 times the number of large candles is the price. And we need to stay within 2,200. So we need to stay under or equal to 2,200. Again, this one's a little bit tricky. We have to figure out a way to combine these two equations so that we figure out what the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget and maintain discounted pricing. So both of these have to be true. The owner has to stay within the budget, so this has to maintain true, has to keep the discounted price, and so that one has to be true. Now, it's only asking us about large candles. So the trick to this problem is that we're going to solve both of these inequalities for S. Once I do that, I will just have S on one side of the inequality. So let's go ahead and do that. In the first equation, or first inequality, I would subtract L from both sides. So we'd get 200 minus L on the right-hand side. So S greater than or equal to 200 minus L. Again, that's what happens when I subtract L from both sides of the first equation. In the second inequality, keep saying equation. In the second one, actually, let me write this up here. What I would do is I'd start out by subtracting 11.6 L from both sides. And then I would have to divide by 4.9. So I'd get X is less than or equal to 2,200 minus 11.6 L divided by 4.9. And so now I have two equations that are just solved for X. And so now I can put this equation together with this equation. And in particular, I can say that since S needs to be smaller than this one and bigger than this one, basically I'm going to write it this way: 200 minus L needs to be less than or equal to S, and S needs to be less than or equal to 2,200 minus 11.6 L divided by 4.9. So S needs to be bigger than 200 minus L, but smaller than 2,200 minus 11.6 L divided by 4.9. And now we just say, well, if this is true for S, we have basically an inequality which says 200 minus L needs to be less than this 2200 minus 11.6 L all divided by 4.9. So in other words, we drop out the S and we just notice that this is forcing us to have 200 minus L less than or equal to that fraction. To solve this inequality, you would multiply both sides by 4.9. 4.9 times 200 minus L on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you'd get 2200 minus 11.6 L. 4.9 times 200 is 980. So 980 minus 4.9 L less than or equal to 2,200 minus 11.6 times L. And so now we can solve for L. I would subtract 980 from both sides and then add 11.6 L to both sides. When you add 11.6 L to both sides, you end up getting 11.6 plus negative 4.9. That will give me 6.7 L on the left. Subtracting 980 from both sides gives me 1,220 on the right. Divide by 6.7, and you end up with kind of an ugly decimal, but that's all right. We get 182, roughly 0.09. I'll round it to 2 decimal places. So L has to be less than or equal to 182.09. Because we can't buy 0.09 of a large candle, remember L stood for the amount of large candles, what we are saying is that the maximum amount of large candles I can buy is 182. So the max amount of large candles we can buy is 182. Okay, the biggest L can be is 182 because we have to have whole numbers as our L. Could go less than that, but that's the idea. So 182 is what we're asking for. It says, what is the maximum number of large candles the owner can purchase to stay within the budget? Well, that number is 182. Again, this was a little bit tricky because we had 2 inequalities and then we set up basically a compound inequality and said, well, that means the lowest value has to be also less than or equal to this highest value. And ignore the S. That one's probably the trickiest problem in that 14 is probably the trickiest problem in this module on test 2. 15 says, in a linear function, f of 0 is equal to 8, f of 1 is equal to 12. What equation defines f? Well, basically we see we have 2 points there. So we know that the slope of a line is going to be the difference in y values, 12 minus 8, divided by the difference in x values. Here we get 1 minus 0. So slope is going to be 4 over 1, which is 4. And then the y-intercept is, in this case, it's going to be 0, 8. I don't have to do any computing to figure that out because I know when you plug in a 0, we get an 8. So the y-intercept is 0, 8. Therefore, if I were just writing the equation of a line as y equals mx plus b, it'd be y equals 4x plus 8. And y is equal to f of x. I can just replace the y with f of x. And we get y equals 4x plus 8, or f of x is equal to 4x plus 8. So my final answer on question 15 is answer D. Question 16 says, the function 6w squared gives the area of a rectangle in square feet. Its width, w, feet, and its length is 6. Let me rephrase that. If its width is w and its length is 6 times the width, which of the following is the best interpretation of f of 14 is equal to 1,176? I was a little bit inarticulate when I read that sentence. But the function is having input of w, and 6 times w squared gives the area. The w that we're inputting is the width of the rectangle, and then the length is 6 times the width. And so what this f of 14 means is that when you have a width of 14, the area of the rectangle will be 1,176. So let's look at these options. Well, the option that says that is option A. Option A says if the width of a rectangle is 14 feet, then the area of the rectangle is 1,176 square feet. Remember, width is going to be in feet, area is going to be in square feet. So that's why we don't want to have B. B is not going to work because the area is not in square feet. A is our option that works. C and D don't comport. So A is the answer to question 16. Let's take a look at question 17. The circle shown has center 0, O, not 0, O, circumference of 144 pi, and diameters PR and QS. The length of arc PS is twice the length of arc PQ. What is the length of arc QR? Now, in this case, it said the length of arc PS is twice the length of arc PQ. So PS is going to have arc length of twice whatever the arc length of PQ is. We also know that these two lines are diameters of the circle. So this line goes through the center of the circle. This line goes through the center of the circle, which is O. Because of that, that is going to mean that the length of PQ and the length of SR are the same. So this opposite length, which is SR, is also going to be X. And the length of QR is also going to be 2X. Now, if I add all of those up, I end up with the perimeter, which as a circle, that's just called the circumference, of 144 pi. So essentially what we're saying here is that when you add all these up, 2x plus 2x plus another x, we're going to get 6 times x, and that has to equal 144 times pi. Dividing by 6 on both sides, 144 divided by 6 tells me that the x value is going to be 24 times pi. Now be careful here. X is equal to 24 pi is not the final answer. This is asking for the length of QR. The length of QR is 2 times X. So QR has length 2X, which is going to be 48 pi. So that's what we would do. Let me clear the drawings here and scoot this down. So QR, length of QR, is going to be equal to 2x, which is going to be equal to 48 pi. And that's the answer. 48 pi, or B, is the final answer. Let's look at problem 18. It says a company that provides whale watching tours takes groups of 21 people at a time. The company's revenue is $80 per adult and $60 per child. If the company's revenue for one group consisting of adults and children was $1,440, how many people in the group were children? So if the number of adults plus the number of children was equal to 21, and the price of each adult is $80, and the price of each child is $60, then we can write A plus C equals 21, and the cost will be 80A plus 60C. Now, in this case, it said that the total revenue was $1,440. So 80A plus 60C would be equal to 1,440. And I can just solve this system of linear equations using whatever technique I want. I'm going to use elimination. I'm going to multiply. I'm going to be a little bit clever about this. It's going to ask how many people in the group were children. So I'm going to eliminate the A. I'll eliminate the adults. And the way I do that is I'm going to multiply that top equation by a negative 80 on the left and on the right. When I multiply negative 80 on the left, I get negative 80A minus 80 times C. When I multiply negative 80 times 21, I get negative 1,680. And then the second equation I just keep as is. 80A plus 60C is equal to 1,440. Now the elimination method says add these two equations up now that we have opposite coefficients. And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to eliminate my A. I'll have negative 20 times C is equal to negative 240. divide both sides by a -20, and you'd get that C is equal to 12. Remember, C stood for the number of children that were on this tour. And so that's my final answer. C is equal to 12. C, which is equal to 12. Turns out that's also option C in the outputs. By the way, when you solve this, you can also now see that the number of adults would have been 9, because you could plug in the 12 back in for C here in that first equation and figure out my A has to be 9. And if you wanted to double check that, you could plug in 9 into A, 12 into C, and see that you ended up with $1,440. That means $1,440. So C is the answer to question 18. Question 19 says the function h is defined by h of x is equal to 4x plus 28. The graph of y equals h of x in the xy plane has an x-intercept of a comma 0 and a y-intercept of 0 comma b, where a and b are constants. What's the value of a plus b? So basically, this is going to we're asked to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So let's start by x-intercept. Whenever you're trying to find the x-intercept, you plug in y of 0. So we plug in a y of 0, we get 0 is equal to 4x plus 28. Solve for x, subtract 28 from both sides, and then divide by 4. You get a -7. As your value of x. So that means the x-intercept, let me write it over up top here, is going to be -7 comma 0. So the a there is going to be a -7. Now the y-intercept happens when x is 0. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get y is equal to 4 times 0 plus 28, plugging in 0 into the x value of that function. And that's pretty easy to solve. Y equals 28. All I have to do is simplify that right-hand side. So that means that my y-intercept is the point 0 comma 28. So the b of my y-intercept is 28. Therefore, when it says what is the value of a plus b, well, a plus b is equal to -7 plus 28, which is equal to a positive 21. So 21 is the answer for question 19, and that is option A. So A of 21 is the answer to question 19. Let's look at question 20. It says one of the factors of 2x to the third plus 42x squared plus 208x is x plus b, where b is a positive constant. What is the smallest possible value of b? So what we would do is we would start by factoring that polynomial. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a greatest common factor of all three terms. 2x is common to all three terms. When I pull that out of the first term, I get x squared. When I pull that out of the second term, I get 21x. And when I pull that out of the third term, I get 104. So we get 2x times the quadratic as this polynomial. So now I just have to factor that quadratic. I'm going to factor it into two components. Because I have a coefficient of 1, I can write it as x plus a number times x plus another number. I just need to look for numbers that multiply to give me 104 and add to give me 21. So factors of 104 that add to give me 21. I'm not going to list them all right now, but basically, I'm just going to give you which ones they are. You can look through factors of 104, write them all down, and figure out which ones add to 21. But as you can see, I've already done that work. 8 and 13 are the two numbers that multiply to give you 104 and add to give you 21. Now let's look at 20. It says one of the factors is x plus b, where b is a positive constant. What's the smallest possible value of b? Now, some people may want to write this first x as like x plus 0. So technically, we could think of this as having three options, 0, 8, and 13. But b has to be positive. 0 is not positive. It's neither negative nor positive. So we don't even have to worry about writing x plus 0 like that. So b has to be positive. The smallest possible positive value of b is going to be the 8. 13 is bigger than 8. So the answer is 8. Smallest possible value of b is 8 for question 20. For question 21, it says in the given system of equations, a is a positive constant. The system has exactly one distinct real solution. What is the value of a? So the first thing we have to realize is that y equals negative 1.5 is a horizontal line. X squared plus 8x plus a is a quadratic equation, and therefore it's going to give me a parabola. Now, the parabola could pass through a horizontal line in two spots. If it did that, it would give me two different real solutions, this system of equations. So what needs to happen to just get one solution is that this parabola needs to come down, touch my line, the horizontal line, at the vertex, and then go back up. That's the only way that we end up with one solution to this system of equations. Now, you can do this in a number of ways. If you had access to a graphing calculator, then you could probably just guess at a few A's until you get it right and graph it until you see this happen. If you don't, then you have to use algebra. And that's the way I'm going to show. So let me write this down. One solution means we get the vertex hitting the line, and that means the vertex is going to be such that we're going to have an x value, and the y value of the vertex is going to be negative 1.5. That's the only way we hit the line, right? Y equals negative 1.5. So there we go. Now, we also know that the vertex has x value of opposite of b over 2a. Well, we can see that the b in this case is 8, So we end up with -8. And the a that we're talking about is not the a as the variable here. The a, opposite of b over 2a, a is standing for the coefficient of the x squared. So that might be a little bit confusing. So I'll just do a little asterisk there. So a asterisk, what I mean by that is the coefficient of the x squared, which is 1 in this case. So 2 times 1 is what we're dividing by. So that means the vertex is going to have x value of -4 and y value of -1.5. Knowing that, that means this point of -4, -1.5 is going to be on the graph here. And therefore, I can plug in -1.5 in for the y value and a -4 in for the x value. And I know that that's going to produce a true statement. So I plug that in to my quadratic equation. On the right-hand side, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with a 16 plus a -32 plus a. 16 minus 32 is a -16. And then I can add 16 to both sides. When I add 16 to both sides, I end up with 14.5 as the value of a. So we end up with 14.5 as the value of a using this algebraic approach. We plugged in the vertex. So there you go. 14.5 is the A. And if you want to, you could actually just confirm that if you had a graphing calculator. So if you have a graphing calculator, you can graph both of those and see that it does do this, that the vertex hits the horizontal line in just one spot. Let's look at problem 22. Shrink this a little bit. It says the function f is given. Which table of values represents f of x minus 3? So if we do f of x minus 3, we got x plus 6 in parentheses times x plus 5 in parentheses times x minus 4 in parentheses. And if I did a minus 3 on that, I just subtract 3 after I did all that multiplication. So let me write that f of x and then minus 3 on the outside would give me the product x plus 6 times x plus 5 times x minus 4. And then after I did that multiplication, then I would subtract 3. Now here's the interesting thing. The x values that we're always inputting into these tables are always -6, -5, and 4. Notice that when you plug in a -6, this part turns into a 0. The x plus 6 turns into a 0. And so what's happening is f of -6 minus 3 is turning into 0 times two other numbers, minus 3. Well, that's the same thing when I plug in a -5. When I plug in a -5, this multiplication becomes 0 times two other numbers, which is 0, and then minus 3. And that's the same thing when I plug in a positive 4. When I plug in a 4, I get 0 minus 3. So I get negative 3 every single time when I plug in the negative 6, the negative 5, and the negative 4, or the positive 4, excuse me, misspoke. So the answer to this one is table B. Every time you plug in one of the x values, f of x turns into a 0, and then we subtract 3, and so we end up with a negative 3 as the corresponding y value. So B is the answer to question 22. '23 says for the function q, the value of q of x decreases by 45% in the for every increase in the value of x by 1. If q of 0 is equal to 14, what equation defines q? Now, the first thing we have to realize is that we're decreasing by 45% each time x goes up by 1. So anytime x goes up by 1, we're decreasing by 45%. Now, a decrease of 45%, mathematically, we'd start at 100% as a decimal, that's 1, and we decrease by 45. So we're getting 0.55. And that's going to be a multiplication. So a decrease of 45% is a multiplication by 0.55. That decrease is going to happen each time x goes up by 1. And so my function, my q of x, is going to be some coefficient, I'll call that c for now, times 0.55, and we're repeatedly multiplying that 0.55. So each time x goes up by 1, repeated multiplication is an exponent. Now it also says q of 0 is equal to 14. So this is how I figure out my constant. 14 is what's going to be the output when we put in an input of 0. So in other words, 14 is going to be my c because 0.55 raised to the 0 power is 1. So 14 is going to be my constant. And that means that my q, my function q of x, is equal to 14 multiplied times 0.55 raised to the x power. So I look at which equation that is, and that is equation C. And so 23 has an answer of C, which is the equation q of x is equal to 14 times 0.55 raised to the x power. Let's take a look at question 24. The graph of y equals f of x plus 14 is shown. What equation defines the function f? Now, this is a little bit, this is something about translation. We have y equals f of x plus 14 that's shown. Let's actually just come up with the equation of this line. We can do that pretty quickly. One way by intuition, another way by just looking at the graph. Notice that this graph goes through the point 0, 2, so it's going to have y-intercept of 0, 2. And then the slope of the line is going to be negative 1 over 4 because each time this line goes down 1, we travel over 4. So we're traveling down 1 over 4. You can actually have figured that out just by the slope of the line anyways. So the line shown is going to be negative 1/4 times x plus 2. Now that y is equal to f of x plus 14. So f of x plus 14 is equal to negative 1/4 times x plus 2. Subtracting 14 from both sides gives us a negative 1/4 x minus 12 as my f of x. So that's what you would do if you did it all algebraically. You can also say, well, that's the graph of f of x plus 14. So I could have just subtracted 14 off of the 2 and ended up with a negative 12 as my f of x. But that's the equation. F of x is equal to negative 1/4 x minus 12, which is obviously option A. So A is the answer to question 24. Let's look at question 25. The side lengths of right triangle RST are given. Triangle RST is similar to triangle UVW, where S corresponds to V, T corresponds to W. What is the value of tangent of W? So this is a right triangle, and RST is going to be similar to UVW. Now, before I go into anything, you'll notice that because this is a right triangle, what's going to happen is the longest side is going to be the length of the hypotenuse. So TR is going to be my hypotenuse. RS and ST are going to be my legs. And so we'll write that out, and then we'll see how that is similar to UVW. S needs to be corresponding to V. T needs to be corresponding to W. I'm going to go ahead and draw that and then just copy it and paste it in here so we can see it. So there we go. I've pasted these two triangles in here, and I've kind of matched up the shapes. Now, I don't know if UVW is a triangle that's a lot bigger than RST or if it's a lot smaller. So I made it a fairly similar size, but it doesn't matter what the size is for this problem. We're asking for the tangent of W, and on a right triangle, the tangent is opposite over adjacent. The way the mnemonic to remember that is SOHCAHTOA. And SOHCAHTOA stands for sine is equal to the opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. Now, so we're looking for tangent of W. Tangent of W is going to be the opposite over adjacent. Again, I don't know if this triangle is the same size. It's probably smaller or probably bigger, probably different size. They're similar but different size. But the ratio of these two legs should be the same ratio as the legs of this triangle because these are similar triangles. And so the tangent of W is going to be the exact same value as the tangent of T, which we know is opposite over adjacent. So that's 20 over 48. And we just need to simplify that fraction. 20 over 48 simplifies to 5/12. And so 5/12 is the final answer, which obviously is B. So option B is the answer to question 25. Question 26 says 1 gallon of paint will cover 220 square feet of a surface. A room has a total wall area of W square feet. Which equation represents the total amount of paint needed to paint the walls of the room twice? Now, be careful about that. We need to paint the walls of the room twice. So the total paint amount is going to be equal to the number of square feet we have to paint. We're going to have to paint those square feet of the room twice. So we're going to have to paint this many square feet, 2W square feet. And because each gallon covers 220 square feet, think about it like this. One gallon covers 220 square feet. So multiplying 1 gallon times 220 square feet, the square feet will cancel each other out. And we'll get P in gallons. So the amount of paint that I need is going to be equal, to 2W divided by 220, or P is equal to W over 110. Therefore, A is the correct answer. By the way, be very careful in reading this problem. The first time I read it, I didn't read the word twice, and so I thought, oh, that's weird. But make sure you read that word twice. If you're painting the wall twice, then you painted 2W square feet. The last problem is 27, and it says a number A is 110% greater than the number B. The number B is 90% less than 47. What is the value of A? So we have a bunch of equations here. A is 110% greater. That's going to be 1 plus 1.10. Then B. So 1 plus 1.10 times B is 110% greater than B. So A is equal to essentially 2.1 times B. And then the number B is 90% less than 47. If I take 90% less, that's 1 minus 90%, or 1 minus 0.9 times 47. So 90% less is that. And you can see that that means that B has to be equal to 4.7 when I do that calculation. Since A is 2.1 times B, we can now find A by taking 2.1 times 4.7. And when I do that calculation, I end up with 9.87. So A is 9.87, and that is the answer to question 27. '27 is the last question in practice test 2, module 1. So obviously, we went over practice test 2, module 1 in this video. In other videos, we'll go over other practice tests and other modules. Module 2 of practice test number 2 will be linked in the description of this video. And obviously there's lots of other tests on the SAT practice tests website. But that is it for this video.